I want to take you back to a specific moment in time. It's New Year's Eve, 1977. President Jimmy Carter is in Tehran.
All right.
He's at this lavish state dinner, raising a champagne toast to the Shah of Iran. And he says something that, in hindsight, might be the biggest jinx in political history.
Oh, I know this quote. It's painful.
He calls Iran an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world.
An island of stability, which is just wow. Because less than 2 years later, the Shah is running for his life, the monarchy is completely gone, and the Islamic Republic is born.
Exactly. It's a total geopolitical earthquake. And usually when a government collapses like that, you can see the cracks from a mile away. Yeah, the economy's in the toilet, or there's a famine, or they're losing a war.
Right. Usually there are flashing red lights everywhere.
But here is the hook that grabbed me when I was reading through our stack for today. Iran was the opposite. Their national revenue had just quadrupled. They were buying the most advanced technology on Earth. They had a huge army. On paper, they were absolutely winning.
It's the ultimate counterintuitive case study, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does a country that is seemingly at the peak of its power just disintegrate?
That is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to look under the hood of the 1979 revolution. And we're going to move past the standard story. You know the one I mean.
The religious uprising narrative.
Yeah.
Which is the version everyone learns. The Shah was modern and secular. The people were traditional and religious. They clashed, and religion won. And, I mean, while that's true, it's so incomplete. It's like describing a car crash by only talking about the weather.
And ignoring that the brakes were cut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're looking at the breaks today. We have a fascinating stack of sources. We've got a comparative economic study that pits Iran against, and this surprised me, Indonesia.
Me too.
And we have these declassified NSA reports that actually use chaos theory, actual mathematics, to explain why the U.S. intelligence community was so completely blindsided.
So we're essentially analyzing a perfect storm.
It wasn't just one thing. It was this combination of economic overheating, a reform program that totally backfired, and a political system that looked stable on the outside but was actually, well, it was behaving like a pile of sand ready to slide.
Okay, so let's start with that reform program. This is something called the White Revolution, and I have to stop you right there. Was this the revolution against the Shah? Because the name is incredibly confusing.
It is confusing, but no. The White Revolution, which launched way back in 1963, was the Shah's own project.
His own project?
Yes. He called it white to symbolize that it was a bloodless, peaceful transformation. He basically wanted to drag Iran from a feudal society into a modern industrial power, all within a single generation.
I'm looking at the list of reforms here in the notes. It's
Okay.
aggressive. We're talking about giving women the right to vote and run for office, raising the marriage age to 15, nationalizing forests.
It was a complete overhaul of society, top to bottom.
And the stats on paper, they look great. Literacy jumped from 26% to 42% thanks to something called the Literacy Corps. I love this detail, using military service to send young men into villages to teach reading.
It's a brilliant idea in theory. And if you were a Western observer in the mid-70s, looking at this data economic growth averaging nearly 10% a year, feudalism being dismantled, you'd think the Shah was a hero.
You'd think he was the most secure leader in the Middle East.
Without a doubt.
But clearly he wasn't. So where did this go wrong? Because the centerpiece of this white revolution was land reform. The government bought land from the big feudal landlords and sold it to the peasants. Nearly 90% of sharecroppers became landowners. How does giving people land make them want to overthrow you?
It's a classic case of unintended consequences. To understand why this backfired, you have to look at who the Shah had to take the land from. By doing this, he alienated the two most powerful traditional groups in the country simultaneously.
Okay, the landlords I get. You took their property. But why the clergy? Were they big landowners?
Huge. This is a crucial detail that often gets missed. The clergy controlled massive amounts of land under charitable trusts, known as VAC.
VAC. Okay, let's unpack that term.
Essentially, it's a religious endowment. People would donate land to a mosque, and the income from that land would then fund the entire religious establishment. It made the clergy financially independent of the state.
So when the Shah's land reform broke up these trusts...
He hit them right in the wallet.
Yeah.
He demonetized the religious establishment. He stripped them of their financial autonomy.
That makes so much sense. So suddenly, the Shah isn't just a secular ruler they disagree with. He's an existential threat to their very institution.
Precisely. And this is when Ayatollah Khomeini really emerges as a major voice.
Hmm.
He wasn't just attacking the Shah for being un-Islamic or for giving women rights, though he certainly did that too.
Right.
He was attacking the Shah for trying to destroy the clerical institution itself. He called the reforms evil intentions.
Okay, so the Shah angered the elites and the religious leaders. That's dangerous. But he bought the loyalty of the peasants, right? He gave them land. Shouldn't this massive lower class now be on his side?
You would think so. But our sources point out a critical failure in the execution. While many peasants got land, many didn't get enough land to actually survive or run a commercial farm.
Ah.
And more importantly, the Shah destroyed the old support system without building a new one.
What do you mean by support system?
Well, under the old feudal system, as bad as it was, the landlord provided the seeds, the water rights, the protection. He was the safety net. When the Shah removed the landlord, that safety net just vanished.
So the peasants were free, but they were completely on their own.
And many of them failed.
Yep.
They couldn't make the farms work. So what happens, you have this massive migration of broke, disillusioned peasants leaving the countryside and flooding into the cities.
Creating a new class of urban poor.
Exactly. They end up in these shanty towns around Tehran. The traditional religious people who are now struggling to survive in a rapidly modernizing, westernized city that they don't culturally recognize. They became the foot soldiers for the revolution.
So the White Revolution created the tinderbox. You've got angry elites, displaced peasants, but then comes the gasoline.
Right. Let's talk about the money.
The 1973 oil shock.
The price of oil quadruples, almost overnight. Iran is suddenly swimming in cash.
Now, this is the part where I need you to explain the logic to me. Because if I'm running a country and I suddenly get a massive windfall of money, I assume that's a good thing. How does getting rich destroy the Shah?
It depends entirely on how you spend it. And this is where that comparative study in our stack is so illuminating. It compares Iran to Indonesia.
Which feels like a random comparison at first.
It does, but it's perfect.
Okay.
Both were oil-rich autocracies. Both were U.S. allies. Both had strongmen leaders, the Shah in Iran, Suharto in Indonesia. And both get hit with this massive wave of cash at the exact same time.
So why did Indonesia survive its oil boom while Iran collapsed?
Because the Indonesian dictator, Suharto, he actually listened to his technocrats.
Okay.
They were a group of economists known as the Berkeley Group, because a lot of them went to school in California, and they were terrified of inflation.
So when the money poured in, what did they do?
They urged caution. They actually slowed down. They used the money to pay off foreign debts. They invested in, boring stuff like agriculture and rural infrastructure, places where the poor people actually lived and worked.
They put the money into the countryside to stabilize the population.
Precisely. They treated the oil money as a temporary bonus, not a permanent salary. Now, compare that to the Shah.
The Shah had a different vibe.
Completely different. The Shah sidelined his technocrats at the central bank. He basically ignored his own budget planners. He saw the money and just. He doubled government spending overnight. He wanted a big push into heavy industry, nuclear power plants, steel mills, advanced weaponry.
He went on a shopping spree.
He did. But here's the problem. You can't just buy a modern economy off the shelf. Iran didn't have the infrastructure to handle it. The ports couldn't handle the ships. The roads couldn't handle the trucks.
The notes mention that ships were waiting anywhere from 3 to 6 months just to dock.
It was a total bottleneck. So you have billions of dollars chasing a very limited supply of goods. And when you have too much money chasing too few goods, what do you get?
Massive inflation.
Skyrocketing inflation. The cost of living in Tehran just exploded. Rents doubled. Food prices went up. And this is where the Shah made a fatal political error. Instead of admitting, okay, we spent too much, we need to cool down, he looks for a scapegoat.
This is the war on profiteers. I read this part of the source material 3 times because I couldn't believe it. He blamed the merchants.
He blamed the greedy business owners.
Yeah.
He launched this harsh campaign. He sent government inspectors into the bazaars to arrest shopkeepers, find factory owners, and publicly shame them for price gouging.
Wait, pause. These are the bazaar merchants. The middle class. These are usually the people who support the status quo. And he's arresting them.
He is systematically dismantling his own coalition. In the 60s, he lost the clergy and the landlords. Now, in the mid-70s, he's declaring war on the bazaar merchants and the industrialists.
He's alienating everyone.
Everyone who runs the economy. And meanwhile, because of all this oil money, the Iranian currency, the rials, it became super strong, right?
Right.
Yes, and this leads to another economic disaster called Dutch disease.
Okay, break that down for us. I've heard the term, but explain it like I'm five.
Sure. So when you export a ton of oil, everyone wants your currency to buy it. So the value of your currency goes up. That sounds good, but it makes foreign imports incredibly cheap for your people to buy.
So if I'm an Iranian in Tehran, it becomes cheaper to buy wheat from Kansas than to buy it from a farmer down the road.
Exactly that. Or cheaper to buy shoes from Europe than from the local cobbler. Cheap imports flooded the country, which just crushed local Iranian farmers and traditional manufacturers.
Which just drove more people out of business and into the cities, adding to that angry mob we talked about earlier.
Right, so Indonesia used oil money to stabilize the poor. Iran used it to build heavy industry that caused inflation, widened the wealth gap, and turned the middle class against the regime.
It's a tragedy of mismanagement, but this leads to the big mystery for me. If the economy was overheating, the people were angry. Where was the U.S. government?
That is the million-dollar question.
The Shah was America's biggest ally in the Middle East. The CIA, the NSA, the State Department, they were all watching. How were they so blindsided that Carter was making toasts to stability a year before the collapse?
The NSA report in our stack offers a really unique explanation for this. It argues that the U.S. analysts were trapped in a mental model. They called it the rational actor model.
Meaning they assumed everyone behaves logically.
Basically, they assumed the Shah was a rational decision-maker who was in control. They assumed the Iranian state was a linear, stable system, so they just looked at the hard power. How many tanks does he have? How many agents are in Savak, the secret police?
How much money is in the bank?
Exactly. And the math said he is secure. If you have the biggest army and the most money, you should be stable. That's linear thinking. But the report argues that a better way to look at Iran would have been through chaos theory?
Chaos theory.
Or specifically, the concept of a metastable system.
Metastable. That sounds like a contradiction. How can something be stable and metastable at the same time?
Think of a sand pile. You know when you pour sand onto a table? It builds a tone. You can keep dropping grains of sand on it, and it builds up and looks perfectly stable. A solid pyramid.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
But eventually, the pile gets so steep that it reaches a state of criticality. At that point, the system is metastable. It looks solid, but it's actually incredibly fragile. Dropping just one single more grain of sand can cause a massive avalanche that changes the whole shape of the pile.
So the argument is that Iran in 1978 was that sand pile. It looked like a solid mountain of stability, but structurally, underneath the surface, it was ready to collapse.
And the U.S. intelligence was looking for a bulldozer to knock it over like a Soviet invasion. They weren't looking for single grains of sand. They weren't realizing that small, seemingly insignificant events could trigger a total collapse because the system was already at that critical point.
The butterfly effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sensitivity to initial conditions.
The report lists a few of these butterfly moments. The one that really stood out to me was the cassette tapes.
Oh, this is such a great example of technology disrupting power. We think of social media doing that today, but this was 1978.
How did it work?
Well, the Shah controlled the TV and the radio. He controlled the broadcast media. He thought he controlled the narrative. But Ayatollah Khomeini was in exile in Paris. He would record his sermons, these fiery anti-Shah sermons, on simple audio cassettes.
And then what?
They were smuggled into Iran, copied thousands of times, and distributed in the bazaars and mosques. People played them in their homes and their cars.
It was a low-tech viral network.
It was the 1970s version of a viral podcast or a tweet storm. And because the U.S. analysts were focused on rational actors, stuff, official speeches, newspaper articles, they completely missed this underground network. They couldn't hear the revolution coming.
It was happening on cassette tapes.
It was. And the report also talks about the 40-day cycle. This felt like the engine of the revolution. Can you explain how that worked? It sounds like a tragic feedback loop.
It is. In Shia Islam, there is a strong tradition of mourning the dead 40 days after they pass away. So January 1978, there's a protest in the city of Qom. The police panic, open fire, and people are killed.
Okay, so that's the initial spark. A tragedy, but maybe an isolated one.
That's how the U.S. saw it. But 40 days later, in the city of Tabriz, people gathered for the memorial service of those killed in Qom. That memorial turned into an angry protest against the Shah. The police fired again, more people died.
Which means 40 days later.
You have another memorial for the new victims, which becomes another riot, which leads to more deaths.
And another memorial 40 days after that.
Exactly. It created this self-sustaining rhythm of violence. The unrest didn't die down. It amplified. It got bigger every 40 days.
And the U.S. analysts, looking at their charts, just saw these as periodic disturbances.
They thought the police could handle it. They didn't see the cumulative chaotic energy building up. They didn't realize the system had reached that point of criticality where the old rules of police versus protesters didn't apply anymore. The avalanche had already started.
It seems the Shah was also completely disconnected from this reality. The notes mention his lack of common touch.
Incredibly isolated. He was surrounded by yes men who were afraid to tell him the truth. And we know now he was secretly battling cancer, which the U.S. didn't even know about. He was medicated, he was detached. He truly believed he was leading his people to a great civilization.
He didn't realize he'd become the villain in their story until it was far too late.
So to bring this all together, the 1979 revolution wasn't just religious people hating modernity.
Not at all. That's the cartoon version. The reality is a cascade of mechanical failures. You had the White Revolution reforms, which, while well-meaning, displaced the poor and angered the traditional elites.
Then you had the 1973 oil boom, which was mismanaged so badly, especially compared to a country like Indonesia, that it caused massive inflation and turned the middle class against the Shah.
And finally, you had a U.S. intelligence apparatus that was wearing blinders. They were looking for a stable ally based on tank counts and GDP when they should have been looking for a chaotic system on the verge of collapse.
It really forces you to rethink how we view stability in the world.
It does. We tend to think of history as a series of predictable steps. Step A leads to step B. But the fall of the Shah teaches us that human systems are more like the weather or that sand pile. They can look solid for decades, masking all that turbulence underneath.
And then one small thing, a cassette tape, a price hike, a single protest in calm flaps its wings, and the whole thing comes down.
And that's the provocative thought I'm left with. We look around the world today at countries or institutions that seem immovable. They have the money, they have the tech, they seem too big to fail. But if you apply this chaos lens, how many of them are actually metastable?
How many are just one grain of sand away from an avalanche?
It makes you look at the news a little differently.
That is a slightly terrifying but necessary question to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the economics of oil to the math of chaos.
Just remember, having all the resources in the world doesn't save you if you don't understand the system you're operating in.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the Iranian Revolution. Hopefully it gave you a new perspective on how quickly winning can turn into losing.
Until next time, keep looking for the butterflies.
See you next time.